Damat Ferit Pasha, the Grand Vizier, takes action. A new war erupts in Eastern Europe. There is decisive Britain action in the Caucasus. And Mustafa Kemal-led Atatürk is finally given a job. This April, 100 years ago, on this episode of Salvation and Catastrophe, the Greek-Turkish War, 1919-1923. Welcome, I'm Konstantinos Travlos. On 2nd April 1919, the inability of the pro-Entente Ottoman governments to control the war ministry continues, as a certain Shakir Pasha replaces Abu Ahmed Pasha, who had replaced the previous war minister Ömer Yaver Pasha. In just 4 months, 4 war ministers had been replaced. On the other hand, the General Chief of Staff had only changed twice, from Cevat Jobanli Pasha to Fezmi Çakmak Pasha, both men with connections to Mustafa Kemal Pasha and with the Burgoyne resistance movement, mostly organized by ex-members of the Committee of Union and Progress and other officers, a lot of them in the political and social circle of Mustafa Kemal Pasha. This is emblematic of the inability of the government to wrest control of the army from the officers associated with the Committee of Union and Progress. Around this time, the demobilization of the Ottoman army is almost wrapped up. 6 months since the armistice. This demobilization is largely controlled by the General Chief of Staff with very little foreign interference. On 4th April 1919, Smoot's mediation expedition to Hungary takes place. The Smoot's mission was a powerful indicator of the fundamental willingness of the UK government, or at least certain elements of the UK government around Prime Minister David Lloyd George, to negotiate with political forces even if those forces claim to be socialist or communist radicals. On the other hand, at this point of time, the French were extremely opposed to any negotiations with pro-Soviet governments and fully supported Romania. On 10th April 1919, Kemal Bey, the Kaimai Kalan of Bogaz Liyan in Yozgat, found guilty of war crimes against Ottoman Armenians, is executed on this date. By mistake, I put it in the 10th of March, but it actually took place on April 10th. As noted in the previous March episode, his execution led to an anti-war crimes tribunal demonstration, mostly organized by ex-members of the Committee of Union and Progress. The next day, on 11th April 1919, after the initiation of operations on the 4th of April, 2,500 men of the 82nd Brigade under General Keith Maitland Davis of the British 27th Division, which is the main British military strength in the Caucasus at those time, together with 2,000 men of the new Republic of Armenian Army, occupy Kars and dissolve the Muslim Provisional Government of the Southwestern Caucasus Republic. The region was then given to the administrative control of Armenia, though the British were at pains to make it clear that any final disposition of the territory will be decided at the Paris. The ease with which a relatively small Entente military force pacified a very large Muslim region like Kars led many, including Greek Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos, to expect that the presence of small Entente forces in support of Armenian and Greek forces will suffice to pacify Muslim opposition to the expansion of Greek and Armenian sovereignty over Anatolia. The problem was, what happens if those Entente forces are not available? The next day, on 12th April 1919, Kazım Karabekir Pasha leaves Istanbul to take up command of the powerful 15th Army Corps posted in Erzurum. With 12,500 men and 22 guns, it was the largest of the demobilized Ottoman formations, and together with the 3rd Corps in Sivas of 4,700 men and 24 guns, gave the Ottomans a military force of 18,200 men and 46 guns situated in the east. Now, he claims in his memoirs that he had talked to Mustafa Kemal Pasha the previous day and exhorted him to leave for Anatolia. Karabekir was related with Ali Fuat, later Çebesoy, commander of the 20th Army Corps located in Ankara. Thus, the commanders of 2 Ottoman Army Corps, the 15th and 20th, were in very close contact with Mustafa Kemal, later Ataturk. On 12th of April 1919, Eleftheris Venizelos and French Prime Minister Clemenceau lodged complaints against actions by the Muslim nationalist groups in the Aydin province against Ottoman Greeks. Now, what is going on here is that throughout this whole period that we have been covering, the Ottoman Greek deportees and refugees who had left the country as a result of the 1914-1918 period are now returning to their homes, most of which have been taken over by local Muslims or by Romanian Muslim refugees of the 1912-1913 period. Now, while the Ottoman government is supposed to facilitate the safe return of the deportees and refugees, the reality is that on the local level, CUP, Committee of Union and Progress organized cells oppose that return. In many places, this opposition takes the form of criminal acts, including rape and murder, sometimes covered by the local authorities, sometimes resisted. In other areas, like Ayvalık Kidoniye, the Ottoman Greek refugees returned armed and engaged in a violent conflict with the Romanian Muslim refugees that have taken their houses and homes in order to survive. Pro-Greek political leaders and Greece argued that the conditions of the ground are coming close to a racial war, which the Ottoman government cannot stop, necessitating Entente military intervention, while pro-Ottoman and Ottoman leaders claim that the incidents are exaggerated and nowhere near the level of intensity claimed by the Greeks and those who support them. It is more honest to say that there were certain regions where the Greek interpretation was closer to reality, like Aydin, Aydinion, Pontus, the Kradeniz region, and Ayvalık Kidoniye, and regions where the situation was closer to the Ottoman interpretation of reality. That said, the memory of 1914-1918 cast a shadow on how people saw the current situation. The embrace of the 1914-19 events by the current anti-Entente political actors in the Ottoman Empire, expressed by their opposition and condemnation of the war crimes tribunals, was a very powerful tool in the hands of Prime Minister Eleftheris Venizelos. On 15th April 1919, the Hungarian Soviet Republic launches a preemptive attack on massing Romanian forces, which leads to the onset of the Romanian-Hungarian War. Contrary to popular views, the Greek-Turkish War was not the first overt attempt of a defeated power of the First World War to militarily contest against the peace treaties and peace terms that were prepared by the great powers at Paris. The Hungarians, under Bela Kun, were the first. I cannot say if the nationalist movement in the Ottoman Empire took inspiration or not from the Hungarian example. That definitely would be a cool topic for scholarly research, so any of you who are historians, that's definitely something worth looking into. On 20th April 1919, Greek Prime Minister Eleftheris Venizelos writes to his Vice Premier Repoules that he hopes that the invitation of the German delegation to Versailles signals the imminent resolution of the negotiations for the German treaty, which promises a resolution to the Bulgarian and Ottoman negotiations as well, somewhere he hoped in the summer of 1919. In expectation of this, Venizelos discusses preparations for elections. He first believes that the sitting parliament of 1915, also called the Lazarus Parliament, should further extend its duration for another 2-3 months. Its goal would be to ratify the expected treaties, prepare elections for a national assembly that then will change the constitution, and pass any necessary measures for the expected expansion of the Greek state. One of the biggest issues for Venizelos was figuring how to include the populations of the newly incorporated regions of Greece, populations that were staunch Venizelists, in the elections of any national assembly. Considering the difficulties of creating electoral rolls for the new regions, he suggests that in the newly incorporated regions, elections should be held only in the big urban centers. For example, Edirne, Andrianoupolis. This had for him the added advantage of minimizing the representation of the large rural Turkish population in the new National Assembly to what he calls rational levels. He also argues that the new assembly should have either the same number or a smaller number of members of parliament than the normal previous parliamentary assemblies, calling for about 200 members. For a state of 7 million, which he expects the new Greece to be population-wise, that will mean 1 member per 35,000 people. He will prefer even fewer, 150, but knows that this might be resisted. He also told Repoulis to prepare so that the Greeks of the broader diaspora, that means Greeks living in England, America, Italy, and so on, can participate. When it comes to the issue of Izmir-Smyrna, he tells Repoulis that he believes the United States has accepted Greece getting it and parts and the smaller town of Aivali, Kydonie. He then told Repoulis to strengthen the censorship of the press, especially stopping the communist Rizospastis paper, the official paper of the Seke party, and the Nea Elada paper from publishing anti-British articles. Now let us take a break for a moment. Let's step back from the chronological narrative and see what is Venizelos essentially saying here, noting here. First, censorship is still going on in Greece. While some opposition papers are permitted to run, others, like Scrip, are not. One of the main accusations by anti-Venizelos politicians against his administration was that he was ruling in an authoritarian way, that he was a tyrant. Venizelos countered those accusations by noting that his restrictive policies were in line with what were the policies of the other Entente powers during the war. This debate over the character of the 1917-1918 Venizelos regime has been going on behind the scenes of our chronological narrative. Second, Venizelos knows that he cannot be sure of winning an election with just the support of New Greece. Those are the regions that were once ruled by the Ottoman Empire and which Greece had won in the First and Second Balkan War. The narrative of Venizelos dictatorship strongly reverberated with many of the Greeks of what is called Old Greece, which is the Greece before 1912, as well as some parts of New Greece. Events of 1917-1918, such as the massacres of Apiranthos in Naxos, the violent repression of anti-conscription resistance in the Chalkidiki Peninsula in Macedonia, and the executions associated with the repressions of the mutinies of the 2nd and 12th Infantry Regiments created a fact that supported an interpretation of dictatorships. So Venizelos knew that he could not rely on just New Greece to counter the voting weight of Old Greece. Third, Venizelos de facto recognized that there are significant Muslim populations in the areas ceded to Greece and about to be ceded to Greece, especially in the rural areas. Despite his attempts to leverage his okay relations with Muslim Cretans, he has been unable to win over the Muslims of New Greece to his party. In the May 1915 election, most of the non-Greeks of New Greece had voted for the opposition parties led by Dimitrios Gounaris. This is why in the newly ceded territories, with their even bigger Muslim populations, it would be good to turn necessity, the lack of the administrative capacity of the Greek state, to opportunity. keeping the number of non-Greek electors to a minimum and thus the number of non-Greek members of parliament who could work with opposition parties. Now, Venizelos is not opposed to equal rights for Muslims in Greece, but he's not above using political tricks to manage the manifestation of those equal rights. Finally, counter to what many of his opponents accuse him of, especially later after the events are done, he was not planning the 1920 elections in order to escape from responsibility for the Asia Minor imbroglio. Venizelos was considering elections as early as 1919. His goal, though, was not simply replacing the problematic Lazarus Parliament of May 1915. He was seeking a major constitutional reform that will make the Greek political system more manageable for him. At least in 1919, Venizelos was confident he could win an election, though it is clear that he knew that his support in the country was much less widespread than he claimed when he was talking to the Allied powers. And those Allied powers had their own sources of information about the political conditions and the political reality of Greece. On 16th April 1919, in an effort to bolster the position of the Ottoman throne and to answer Greek and Entente accusations of inability to stop ethnic violence in the Ottoman Empire, the Grand Vizier Damat Ferit Pasha has Sultan Mehmet the Sixth Bahreddin sent imperial commissions of admonition, Hayat-ul-Nasiha, to the epicenters of troubles in the empire. Prince Abdurrahim is sent on a fact-finding trip to Western Asia Minor. In Thrace was sent Prince Cemaleddin, who was joined by Cevat Çobanlı Pasha and Fezmi Çakmak Pasha. The commission were usually warmly welcomed by Muslims, but in accordance with the March decision of secession from the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Armenians and Ottoman Greeks refused to meet with them. On 21st April 1919, in Istanbul, Constantinople, British High Commissioner Admiral Calthorpe complained to Grand Vizier Damat Ferit Pasha of political activity by Ottoman officers in Eastern Anatolia. An attempt of Damat Ferit Pasha to get the British to send troops to help the Ottoman government control the country fails. That said, the British were also not willing to seriously commit to Eastern Anatolia, or Armenia for that matter, as we will see later in our chronological narrative. That said, Ferit Pasha panicked. After discussions with the Interior Minister, Mehmet Ali Bey, who had contacts with Mustafa Kemal Pasha through his relative Ali Fuat Cebesoy, they decided to ask Mustafa Kemal Pasha to participate in the new inspectorate system that was being set up by the War Ministry as part of the reorganization of the now much smaller Ottoman Imperial Army. Supporting Mehmet Ali was the Navy Minister Enver Pasha, who was in turn related to the War Minister Shakir Pasha. Between 21st and 24th April 1919, Italian troops from their bridgehead in Antalya, Atalia, established a presence in Konya, Iconium, and Afyon-Karahisar. On 23rd April 1919, Mustafa Kemal Pasha is appointed Inspector of 9th Army Troops. On 28th April 1919, there's the official onset of the second phase of the Ottoman court-martials for revenge during World War I. The same day, the Greek Expeditionary Force evacuates Crimea. The Greek army had in general done well in the low-intensity warfare it faced in the region, though it came also very close to having a fight with mutinous French troops. Thanks to the campaign, about 15 of the 31 infantry regiments mobilized by Greece in the 1917-1919 period had at least some significant combat experience. But the other half of the army had no combat experience from the First World War. They were essentially completely green. More importantly, the Greek military leadership had not been able to gain much combat experience at the level of corps and army levels. As a result, there was a serious lack of capacity at commanding major military units above the level of division, according to the lessons of modern warfare. That said, the force that was sent to Crimea did attain its diplomatic goal, which was to persuade the French to support Greek claims in Thrace and Western Anatolia. On 29 April 1919, an Italian warship arrives in Izmir, Smyrna, raising fears of an imminent Italian move to occupy the region. And on 30th April 1919, after negotiations with the Interior and Naval Ministers and discussions with Ekin Topcuoğlu's deputy, Brigadier Kazım İnanç, Mustafa Kemal Pasha agrees to accept the position of Inspector of the 9th Army, which includes the 15th and 3rd Army Corps. Essentially, Mustafa Kemal Pasha was given wide political and military authority over most of Eastern Anatolia. He was Damat Ferit Pasha's personal representative to the east. These wide powers far outstripped the more limited mandate of Cemal Merinsli Pasha, who was the inspector of the 2nd Army that was situated at Konya. With him, Mustafa Kemal Pasha took Colonel Refet Bele, who from head of the Gendarmerie now became commander of the 3rd Corps at Sivas, his chief of staff Colonel Kazım Dirik, and his personal assistant Lieutenant Colonel Arif. For Mustafa Kemal, this appointment meant he could avoid the increasing attacks of opposition newspapers or having to become a civilian like poor Rauf Orbay that was without a job. Let us step back and consider for a moment the vortex of decisions and luck that resulted in this positioning. First of all, the flight of the three Pashas and many of their closest associates removed many of the members of the Committee of Union and Progress, Ittihat Veteraki Cemiyeti, that had opposed any rise of the influence of Mustafa Kemal Pasha during the Great War. His patron, Ahmet İzzet Pasha, was war minister and then Grand Vizier in the crucial period of the armistice. People with whom he had personal connections, like Cevat Çobanlı Pasha or İsmet İnönü Pasha, held important positions in the all-powerful General Staff, which the Allies did not request to be dissolved. Through them, he got connections with Fevzi Çakmak Pasha. His friend, Refet Bele, was the head of the Gendarmerie. His other friend, Rauf Orbay, had been the naval minister. The dissolution of political parties had removed those surviving members of the Committee of Union and Progress who were civilian politicians and had opposed his attempts to become war minister in the Ahmet İzzet Pasha and Ahmet Tevfik Pasha administrations. In simple terms, the end of the war and Entente policy had permanently weakened in the favor of the military the delicate balance between military and civilian branches of the Committee of Union and Progress that Talat Pasha had fashioned after 1913. And Mustafa Kemal Pasha was a beneficiary of this. Then we have the potential connection with the Italians that Andrew Mango, his biographer, discusses, his general luster as a military officer, and his well-known rift with Enver Pasha, all of which lead the new Sultan to keep him close by him. The rise of Damat Ferit Pasha in a weird way greatly helps Mustafa Kemal Pasha, as through the networks of relatives of Ali Fuad Cebesoy, he now has contacts with both the war minister, the naval minister, and the interior minister. Thus, Mustafa Kemal Pasha becomes the link between two powerful political networks. The family networks underpinning the Damat Ferit Pasha cabinet and the military networks created by the First World War. It is this role plus personal competence that make Mustafa Kemal Pasha the perfect choice for inspector. And thus, Mustafa Kemal Pasha now has military authority over the strongest concentration of Ottoman troops, with the two corps commanders being personal friends. The map you are seeing portrays the extent of regions of the Ottoman Empire with the presence of foreign troops by the end of the month that this episode is covering. The sources for this episode are Andrew Mango, Ataturk, Richard Hovhannisyan, The Republic of Armenia, Volume 1 and Volume 2, Στεφάνου Ιωάννου Στεφάνου, Τα κείμενα του Ελευθερίου Βενιζέλου, The Documents of Eleftherios Venizelos, Volume 2, Eric Zurker, The Young Turk Legacy, and Fahri Belen, Turk Kuturlu Savashi, Turkish War of Salvation. Before leaving you, I would like to give you some information and make some shout-outs. First of all, I want to thank Onur Buyuran and Alper Ozgen of the Kararak War Game Club in Istanbul. They got a microphone for the show, to use for the show, and while I haven't been able to use it in this episode, from now on it will be used, so you can expect much better sound quality. And I promise at some point I'm gonna get a tripod for the camera so we can create a better situation in views. The Kararak Club is a great community of wargamers playing both historical and ahistorical games, ranging from the Ninth Age to Infinity to Bolt Action. And if you are ever in the City of Cities, you should check them out. I also want to give a shout out to a very good friend and fan, Ali Dogan Saginer, and his wargaming company, Iliada Game Studio. He's a good friend and he produces a good product. And you know, if you're a wargamer and interested, you should check it out. Second, I want to give a shout out to the Great War series. I mean, this was the inspiration for this series, and I have to say that the new season that focuses on the conflicts after the war are really great for giving you crucial context of the events I'm covering. You know, I'm not able to cover everything that's going on that's relevant, so you should watch that series to get an idea. Jesse Alexander is doing a great job breaking down the complex information inherent in this period. If you want to understand some of the decisions associated with the Greek-Turkish War of 1919-1923, especially those of great powers, you gotta watch the show. And remember the goats. Third, if you're a Turkish speaker, Türkçe bilmiyorsun, I have been approached by a creative group which is preparing a professionally produced series that will cover the Turkish War of Independence on a monthly basis. There are serious fans behind the show. And unlike me, who really pretty much produces and researches this show with little help, sometimes Doruk Akyüz, a friend, or Emir Yener, a friend, or Onur Buyuran will help, they have a full 12-member research team that go to the archives there. They're serious about it. Now, I have seen some of their material, and I have to say this is gonna be a very professional show, and you gotta look forward to it. The title will be Yüz Yılında İstiklal Harbi, 100 years ago, the War of Independence. So check it out on YouTube. Finally, if you're a Greek speaker and Milat Elinika, check out the TV series Izori and Tafo. After what was a rocky start for me, I have come to really appreciate it. The central actors are great, they're doing a great job. And the uniforms, courtesy of Kaki Depot, if you want reproduction uniforms for the Greek army, you go to these people, are among the best I've seen. Speaking of media, I have created a playlist on YouTube collecting films about the Greek-Turkish War that one can find online. These vary from very bad to very good, and from Greek to Turkish, so you know, check them out. That is all. See you all next month. A month that 100 years ago stands even today as the most portentous month in the history of modern Greece and Turkey. May 1919. See you all in May.